I've started the recording.
Okay, so should I start now? Okay, hello. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Julia Havard. I'm chairing today's meeting. I'm here for the Women's Institute and as one of the environment champions in Truro Diocese, both organisations very keen and active on climate change. Now, this is the third in a series of webinars on climate change here in West Cornwall, and we're exploring how we can better inform and engage local people and how we can understand what can be done locally to support local climate action groups and Cornwall Council in addressing climate change. And we want to understand government policy and scrutinise its effectiveness. In the first meeting, we heard from local climate action groups about their work. And last month, we heard from Cornwall Council about their target of net carbon neutral by 2030 as a local authority and about their work to influence us in the communities to do likewise. Now, we had planned today's session with a speaker from the Committee on Climate Change. That is postponed. Instead, our own MP, Derek Thomas, is introducing us to his new report, Carbon Report First Chapter, looking at action on the road to net zero so far. Now, there's plenty of time for questions. When you have a question at any time, put that in the chat and we will take all the questions after Derek's presentation. We will finish by 5:30. If there are unanswered questions, then we will answer them via email. Now, Derek, over to you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you for that. So welcome everybody and thank you for joining us again. Again, it's a beautiful afternoon. So some of you would have received what I've called the carbon neutral report, and this report is not intended to be to just say the job's done, we can move on to something else. That's absolutely not what was intended. But certainly in recent years, lots of people have come to see me. I've had lots of opportunity to chat to people about their concerns for the climate emergency and how we need to get to net zero and keep temperature rise down as much as possible. And it's clear that that the shift in gear in terms of what's being promised, what is coming into legislation, what has been announced, the funding that's been made available is so broad, and so the amount of information is so enormous that I felt it'd be helpful to put it all in one place. To try and understand what progress is being made, how effective that progress is and where the gaps are. And then what I wanted to do and what I intend and would love to do with, and that's partly why we're discussing it today, is actually for people to have a good look at this and then to come to me and say, okay, well, these are where the gaps are. This is where progress isn't rapid enough. But also this is where we want more opportunities to engage. We want more opportunity to set the terms of reference. We support other legislation, and that's conversation and dialogue that I'm keen to have, but I wanted it to be in the context of as much up-to-date information as we could possibly have. So this report, we'll make it available. So that's the cover, it's black and white, and you won't get a paper copy. I've only got one, and that's for good reason. Basically, if you want it and you haven't already had it, do email in and we'll send it across to you. But it is absolutely a first chapter, and Julia's right to describe it as that, because firstly, when I set out to do this with a member of staff, I didn't expect such a big document. It's 50 pages. There are hundreds and hundreds of bullet points setting out what has been committed to, and also a record of progress. But even since we kind of finished this Easter week, and already there's been significant announcements from government and others about new commitments. So yesterday we heard about the government enshrining in law the commitment to get to 78% reduction in carbon emissions by 2035, and that includes, which will please many of you on this call, I'm sure, our share of international aviation and our share of international freight shipping emissions. That is actually a really big step forward, because I've had lots of conversations, both with constituents, but also with, I had a special meeting on this particular issue following our last meeting with number 10 special advisor on the environment. and with DEFRA and with the Conservative Environment Network, because it is difficult to grapple with that particular aspect of our carbon, our national carbon footprint. So what I'm going to do this evening, I'm going to go through this afternoon, I'm going to go through parts of the report. It's not going to be quick, and hopefully it won't be entirely boring. But it is intended to give a particular, to look at particularly at the areas that people raise with me most often, to whet the appetite, I guess, of those that haven't yet seen it. And I genuinely want to commit to having further dialogue with people, groups or individuals, as we understand what the pace of progress, but also the need to accelerate and make it more comprehensive. There's no way that this report is exhaustive. So, Megan, I'm going to bore you also by saying, next slide, please, Megan. Something I've always wanted to do. First slide, please, Megan. Megan is coming to the very end of her apprenticeship in my office as a business manager, and will carry on working in the office, all being well. So it's really, I've described it as a carbon neutral progress, and yeah, sorry, next one again. And the context, next one, Megan. The context, what I want to start with just setting out exactly what the Committee on Climate Change do. And it's a really significant committee because certainly for as long as I've been an MP, Parliament and various meetings have referred back to what the Committee on Climate Change have said, the kind of budgets they've set, and also the tools they provide to actually help us get there. So one significant event happened a couple of summers ago, where actually it might have been last summer, where they actually for the first time decided that they would hold each government department to account for the reducing and driving down the emissions that attribute to that department. And that's an important point, because prior to that, it is definitely the case that the government departments kind of sliver and shift around, and the emphasis is very much on things like energy and transport, whereas actually every government department has a significant responsibility to take to actually build into their programme carbon reduction. So that was just a quick slide, and that's all in the report about what the work of the Committee on Climate Change does. And it's interesting, and this is not necessarily something that people seem to agree with me on, but the first and second budget, we did actually do better than the UK did better than was set out by the Committee on Climate Change. And at the moment, obviously, the third carbon budget comes to an end in 2022. So each year, the committee set out a challenge the government to explain how they're going to do it and to adopt their recommendation, which is the 78%. That was a recommendation of Committee on Climate Change. Okay, next slide, Megan. So this gives you, so at the moment, the graph you see now is measuring the UK carbon emission. So this is not the aviation, this is not the shipping, but that shows the trajectory of carbon reduction. And what government will always say at the same time, and you've heard it, and I'm not necessarily going to say it again, but the government say that this has been achieved despite economic growth. And often there's a tension, and there'll be a tension even amongst people here in this meeting event, saying that you can't have growth and drive down our impact on the environment. And that's a discussion we can have another day. But this you'll see that we're heading in the right direction, but there's certainly more to be done, and the 78% by 2035 will be quite significant. And okay, so next one, Megan. So if I can start then with 2015. Basically, 2015 was the year, obviously I got elected. And there's no, I said in my introduction to the report that this is always something that I took seriously. My parents were very clear when we were growing up that this was taking care of the environment and playing our part was a responsibility. Obviously, individuals on their own can't bring about the exact change that is needed. And so when I arrived in Parliament, it was really encouraging actually to see how what was being done to address this issue. And the thing that really was a really significant early part of my being an MP was around the time of the agreement of the time of discussion the Paris Agreement in the December of that year. We had briefings by Amber Rudd, who was Secretary of State at the time, setting out what the government was taking to the summit, to the COP20, whatever it was, and what we were hoped to get out of it, and came back and reported back to us what had been achieved and the challenges and the sticking points. And as you'll know, early the following year, 2016, we along with lots and lots of all the countries, adopted and agreed to the Paris Agreement. And so that was 2015. And each year, obviously, what happens with how we measure the fall in emissions or even the rise, it's measured, so 3% that year, and then it's corrected sometime later when more data becomes available. So you'll notice at the end of this report that the actual figures that combine all of the reductions are slightly different to each individual year's sum, but you can work that out. So Megan, next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly run through what some of these mean, because unfortunately it is the case that we in the office have used some abbreviations, and I've just realised the report is all in the wrong order that I've got in front of me. But that's the beauty of having young children in the house. Just bear with me for a second. So actually, can we go back to 2015? Sorry, Megan, I just want to clarify some of these points there. I think I needed to. Yeah. So firstly, I'm going to quickly run through these, but the government announced the reform to the VED. The VED is obviously the vehicle excise duty, to actually create real incentives to have low carbon emission vehicles. The CCS is the carbon capture and storage, and that's where the government cancelled the competition. And we come later in the report about what has been done instead. And there's lots of debate about what's right to, whether it's right to develop the carbon capture and storage. There will always be some of that, but it's much more important, and the priority should be that we actually reduce it in the first place, don't create it in the first place. And obviously the RHI is the renewable heat incentive, so that was extended into 2021. And we're debating that now in Parliament about what should replace that, and how we need to be careful that we don't penalise fuel poverty areas, fuel poor areas, because that will be quite devastating for lots of families here in West Cornwall, for example. 2016. So the pot technologies, pot 2, this is about developing the renewable technologies. Pot 1 was the kind of low-hanging fruit, the easier stuff. Pot 2 was a much more difficult technologies, and so the government set that up, and that was 730 million per year, right up through to 2026, to develop renewable energy opportunities, particularly the much more difficult ones to achieve, and that would help us to get to the point where we really can move away from fossil fuels. You'll see on the 23rd of 11th of that year, November, an additional 300 million to support the development of ultra low emission vehicles. Now, this is 2016. You know now that we've actually gone further than that to get rid of petrol and diesel new cars altogether. Moving to 2017. This is the whole point of this is to give you opportunity for questions, but also to give you an idea of the breadth of things that are happening. But it's worth pointing out that in the report there are several pages for each year. I've just taken a very few of them, and they're kind of the ones that come my way more often from constituents. So in 2017, the agriculture is something that comes up a lot in emails about how we drive down the carbon footprint of agriculture. The truth is that in Cornwall, we actually do quite well because you have lots of quite small farms. Where you have large contracted agriculture, and particularly ornamentals, that's more challenging, although lots of work is going on to protect the soil quality and to help avoid flooding, but also carbon capture. But it's back in 2017, the government published a review of actually what our action plan was for agriculture. Cycling, we know about the sheer amount of money that has gone in and continues to go in every year in cycling and walking infrastructure. Last year, as part of the COVID recovery, huge. I think I was told by Number 10 that £6 billion worth of money of work was available for cycling and walk to improve and increase cycling and walking. And that was announced. That was a part of a fund that was set up last year, and I'm hoping to get some of that for West Cornwall, in additional sums for West Cornwall. You can move to the next slide. I think there's another one for 2017. I just wanted to pick up on the Clean Growth Strategy, which many of you will know about. The Powering Past Coal Alliance. Now, this is a global alliance launched by the UK and Canada to really lead the rest of the world in bringing an end to the use of unabated coal power. You'll know that in this country, we committed to the middle of this decade. I think we've brought that forward now, where we will have no coal power whatsoever in the UK. That has been one of the greatest areas where we've reduced emissions, and it's quite significant. And we will have days like today where the vast majority of energy will be by renewable means. But I wanted to make the point that actually of the global leadership, because I often get criticised about the lack of action and lack of drive or lack of commitment by government to lead the way. But actually there's lots of examples where we have been. And this year with the summit in Carbis Bay and the COP26, you've actually got other examples of where actually the government are very determined to really lead the way and also set the tone. And so on this year, so I didn't go to do 2016, but on this year, the recorded fall in carbon emissions was 2.4%. Now, these are quite small numbers, given that we want to get to 27 to 78% in, not that far off, 14 years. Okay, Megan. So here I said about the carbon budget aims are exceeded. It's interesting because I get lots of emails and conversations with people saying that we keep missing our carbon budgets. And actually all the evidence I've seen so far, evidence from Committee on Climate Change, is that that's not the case. I'm not saying it's enough, but I just think it's the whole point of this report is to help set out exactly what is the case. You'll remember at the beginning of 2018, right at the beginning of the year, the government, Michael Gove at the time, launched the Environment Plan, and this was part of the arrangement post once we'd left the European Union. And that Environment Plan that is now becoming the Environment Bill is a really ambitious and I think quite an exciting piece of legislation. It's got more time than it would have had. It's been delayed, and actually that is, we believe in Parliament, that's to our advantage, because there's already things that we believe will be able to be included in it that weren't intended, that will really help to make it a much better, much stronger piece of legislation. I'll give you one example, which is a very recent one. People will be aware that in the UK, we pump stuff into our rivers and we permit sewage companies, such as South West Water, to pump foul water into waterways when there's very high water levels, rainfall, for example. Now, as that increases, the problem just gets worse as we get more rain. But also we're one of the worst. I think we're possibly worst in the UK for this. Philip Dunn, a friend of mine, we were supporting a private members bill to actually address that and to have proper data and have proper plans to stop that happening. He ran out of time because of obviously COVID, and Friday sittings were stopped by the speaker. And so we did quite a bit of work, Conservative Environment Network, government ministers, and it's actually been adopted in the Environment Bill. So once the bill becomes an act, water companies will be required to clearly record and provide data every year exactly what goes into our waterways, but also develop plans to eliminate it. And that is quite a significant, a very significant step forward, and an example of how the Environment Bill can still address many of the concerns that people have. And there's still room to do that. The Road to Zero strategy was published in the year of 2018. And this is obviously the year that people were genuinely recognising, following the IPCC report, that we had 12 years to really reverse the situation. This is a year that really gripped the nation's attention, and it changed the tone completely in New Parliament. It became from regular conversation to the issue that needed to be addressed. And on that year, the recorded emissions fell by 1.3%. Moving to 2019, or it might be a bit more on 2019. So this is interesting because obviously the news today about the young 9-year-old girl that died of air quality through air pollution. The government got 57 days, I think, to respond to the coroner's report. And we're doing an inquiry on the EFRA Select Committee, the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, on this very issue, on the air quality. And there's absolutely more that we need to do way beyond the recommendations of the World Health Organization. Offshore wind sector deal. What was really interesting is that while there was obviously the protests that were organised by Extinction Rebellion, while I was meeting with people in London during those protests, government were signing deals or auctioning off massive amounts of wind power to people, where we are in a position now to, well, you'll know that the Prime Minister wants all homes to be generated by wind power, offshore wind power, and it's realistic that can happen, and that can happen in fairly good time. There's lots of conversation about how that can be delivered. There's some issues around permissions, believe it or not, for where these offshore wind farms go, but they'll be resolved. Obviously, you would have known about the plans to end gas heating and oil heating in homes. I have some concerns about that for our part of the country, particularly because actually with LPG, there is a commitment to, by 2040, for it to be 100% biofuel. And we just need to be careful that we just don't, unless we have really a different way of maybe developing community energy networks, which is a piece of legislation I'm supporting. There's a real potential to actually create hardship for families who at the moment are off grid and rely very much on oil and gas. We need to do it, but we need to do it properly. So Parliament, you'll remember that Parliament declared the climate change emergency in May. I took part in that and was glad to support that. And it was that year that we were the first country in the world, major economy, to pass laws to meant that it was legally binding for us to end our contribution to global warming by 2050. For many of you on this call, you would have felt about time, and I'd understand why you'd think that, in terms of us getting to grips with it in Parliament in 2019. But actually, in Parliament that year, it felt like a really significant shift and a very more than satisfying big step in the direction that we wanted to get to. So it was good. Next slide, Megan. So I've announced the 2050 and to increase. So by the 2050, to do what we can to increase for global temperature increase to stay under the 1.5%. I'd say we were the first major economy to put that into legislation. It's an interesting one because I get a lot of comment about coal, for example, and other fossil fuels that are used in heavy engineering, heavy industry, and the government are acutely aware of that. But it isn't something I'm not defending anything, but it's just realistic to recognise that it takes time to shift from what we've been doing for a long time to develop this very heavy, to maintain this very heavy industry to a place which is not polluting the environment. And the truth is that if we were to just switch them off today, we would have to import the stuff, so that nothing's really gained, other than we probably increase the carbon footprint of this heavy steel, for example. So the government announced this Clean Steel Fund in 2008, 2019, and there is significant work to find a way to move away, to find alternatives, but still enable us to build the infrastructure that is needed, that partly will be needed to get us out of our cars and in a more environmentally friendly way of living. The international climate finance increase, this is £11.6 billion over four years. So this is doubling the UK investment to help developing countries turn the tide against climate change and species loss. And this international climate finance spend was made by, the commitment was made by the Prime Minister to the UN. And it commits us to at least 11.6 billion over the next 5 years to international development in this area. And that's fairly significant. Just 1 minute, because my children are coming in from school. Right, we need to just keep quiet. And then I've talked about the wind capacity issue and the solar capacity issue. The solar issue is the challenge for us actually at the moment is grid capacity, and this is where the local community networks may well be the solution. And I had a meeting number 10 about that about 2 weeks ago. So again, in this year, 2019, the recorded fall in emissions, which was 3%. I think that's still an estimate. Okay, moving on. So 2020, last year, this is an interesting year because obviously we had everything else to contend with. But we brought forward the date that we would get rid of coal generation for energy altogether, and that's now October 2024, so just over 3 years' time. We committed to, and this is where I had lots of emails of complaint, committed to the banning of selling of house coal and wet wood off the garage forecourts, etc. And the reason, I mean, I had lots of complaints about that, but the reality is that burning green wood and house coal is really bad for the environment. The wood itself, I haven't got the figures in front of me, but is one of the worst ways of us increasing our carbon footprint. But obviously, for when oil prices went very high, an enormous number of homes switched to wood burners, and it's actually, we don't want to be harsh and cruel, and wood burners in homes do create a slightly different atmosphere. But the reality is that wet wood for your wood burners is something that is being phased out and will not be, you cannot buy it. I referred to about the carbon capture and storage early on. So in this year, 2020, £800 million was designated to establish this, and it's an area of development that is needed. But I genuinely am of the view that we've got to do our best. We have to, wherever possible, stop making the emissions in the first place. Stop using carbon, fossil fuels, etc. But there will be some areas where that isn't entirely possible, so we have to find ways of getting around that if we're going to get the net zero. And then you saw about the £640 million announced for tree planting and peatland restoration. You'll know that we've now, in the constituency through my office, now planted more than the 20,000 that we committed to. And the great thing is that by doing it, I just discovered a whole load more landowners and lots of other individuals who are planting significant numbers of trees every year. So the 20,000 that we planted, I think about 21,000 that we planted over a pace. It was about 12 months because we started in the April of 2020. March. That number is just a part of what is actually being planted across the constituency. So some of the young people that were involved in planting those will see significant more woodland and more trees around the patch than they do today. And then you'll see that there was a further £1 billion and another 500 million for car charging points, £70 million allocated for 3,000 charging points, which is interesting. I've got a view about the right way forward, which isn't shared by government, which we can talk about later if people want to. And you can continue to get the grant to buy an electric car, electric vehicle through to 2023 at the moment. Next one, Megan, I think I'm nearly there now. So you'll see, I'm just seeing if one of these that will be, so actually, yes, I remember Grant Shapps launched the pathway for the transport decarbonisation plan. It was a really important day in Parliament. I was there, I listened to it. There's some really ambitious stuff in there. There's lots to prove that it can work, but there's definitely a sense of ambition and aspiration, and we can achieve this to decarbonise transport, which is the biggest area of where we, of all the areas of emissions, that's the biggest chunk still. So you'll see there's I don't know if you can read it, but 139 million to cut emissions in heavy industry, which I referred to earlier. 149 million to drive the use of innovative materials in heavy industry. 26 million to support advanced new building techniques. 10 million pound boost for the state-of-the-art construction tech, which will go towards 19 projects focused on improving productivity and building quality. And the new National Space Innovation Programme backed by £15 million fund for the Space Agency. And the interesting is this constituency is quite an important player in space. The Goonhilly, for example, potentially could be the host of the Deep Space Network, which all people that use that operate in space will need access to, will use. And the real driver behind it is about the use of satellites, which right now we're depending on satellites to communicate in this way, but also the ability to monitor deforestation, illegal fishing, the ice caps, etc. There's a really important part of how we respond to climate change in space, and that is attention, because obviously space itself, the getting to it and launching satellites, etc., has a carbon footprint of its own. But I attended a conference earlier in the year where there was a significant belief amongst people who were scientists who were involved in space, that believed that they could cut the carbon, significantly cut the carbon footprint of launching things into space for the right kind of purpose. I'm not a big fan of launching stuff into space for the fun of it, but I genuinely see the need for the satellite role, the role of the satellites. And the Goonhilly part is really exciting in terms of local jobs and just the ability to attract some really clever people into this part of the world, additional clever people. Megan. You'll remember, you may not remember, but Boris launched the Jet Zero Council. And it's funny, if you read up on it, people outside of aviation see it as a bit of a gimmick. People inside aviation have really responded and are really accelerating their efforts to get to net zero in aviation. And there's a lot of money that government is making available to develop that technology. We definitely need to reduce the flights we take, and certainly reduce unnecessary flights. And the COVID thing will have had a significant impact on that. And it may well be that staycations become the norm for lots of people for a significant length of time in future years. So that's going to have a benefit. But there is flight that does need to happen. And so we just have to commit to finding a way of doing it in a clean and sustainable way. And I believe that there's the ambition to do that. You'll know that the government have brought forward the commitment to end the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. And even today, I was out in the constituency, and someone challenged me on that, because there are lots of people that just believe this is a really unfriendly thing to do. It's going to be very interesting to see how that develops. It certainly forces industry to scale up the development of electric cars, vehicles. But there's question marks about. So, for example, there's lots in the industry that believe that it will take a long time for us to see a real benefit in a carbon footprint because of the carbon that's taken, that's burnt or used in the development of the car itself and the battery. So that needs to be resolved, that how we improve that, how we develop that industry. And Cornwall's quite ambitious about that, because we've got the lithium in our mines. That's proven now. And Cornwall is ambitious about having a place to assemble batteries as well, and actually reduce the miles that are associated with building these electric vehicles. Okay, so probably I can skip that one. This is all in the report, so none of it. You don't need to copy the slides. This is exactly as it is in the report. It's all the content. The slides are slightly changed, but the content is all in there. Megan. So this is where you get to where we are now. So 2015, we had reduced carbon emissions by 37%. We're in 44% now. This is where the sums don't add up, but this is in the 2019 figure is still a good estimate. But you'll know this, and you wouldn't be here if you didn't weren't committed to this, you will see that there's a long way to go. So another 30% to go, no, 34% to go in the next 14 years. So significant progress is needed. And I believe that in the report, it shows how that can be achieved and the kind of steps being taken to achieve that. Okay, Megan? This is where we are now per sector. You'll see, so this is where each one has fallen. And there's no part of no sector in the UK where emissions are increasing, but you'll see that transport is we haven't seen a significant drop in that. We haven't seen a significant drop in agriculture or not in so much as waste as well. In fact, I've done quite a lot of work with an organisation in Cornwall around food waste. I'm led to believe that globally, food waste amounts to 10% of the harmful emissions that we need to get rid of. And that is both, obviously, part of the problem is the food that we produce that isn't used. And we see a lot of that in our around here in Cornwall, but also the food that is just thrown away from our homes, which Cornwall Council have got a clear plan for, which is also in the Environment Bill. But you'll see that there's challenges. So building, I got a building background. I know how it can be done, but it's a sector where it's challenging, expensive, and you need will. You need a will within the sector to really get on top of this. I used to convert barns, and when I had pressure testing, etc., which is not actually required for barns, the people would say that the efficiency of the buildings were better than new buildings because the people that the work I did and the work that people I employed, we just made it an absolute commitment to drive down to improve the efficiency of that building. But it takes extra effort, concentration, and cost. And you'll know that in the building trade, that's not always additional costs is not something that people choose to do necessarily. So the power sector has reduced their emissions by 67%, which is absolutely remarkable. So transport is currently 24% of our emissions. So Megan, next one. So we heard from Cornwall Council last time round, and it was really interesting to see the scope and the kind of work they were doing. But I just wanted to quickly touch on some of the way that the government has helped this. So the government, the figure here is already out of date. So it says £120,000 for the Forest for Cornwall. That is actually now an additional £300,000, so £420,000 now to Cornwall for the Forest for Cornwall. And there's been significant funding available to Cornwall. Cornwall are running a part of a pilot to improve the efficiency of homes. You'll know already about the £23.5 million that was provided actually for last year to begin a 4-year pilot last year to reduce the costs, the ticket price on buses, public transport buses in particular, but also to increase the accessibility of buses. That got delayed a year because obviously the COVID. So that should start, I don't know actually where that is, because it should have started the 1st of April, but I'll have to find out what's going on there. And then you'll know about there's been a lot of money announced for cycle paths, and I'm hoping for another chunk of money announced before the G7 for cycle paths to complete a trail that we want to build from Mousehole round to St Ives and into Hale. And that would be remarkable for this part of the world, both to enable people to get in and out of work more easily, and that would be definitely the case in St Ives. But also there's a benefit because people enjoy coming and doing cycling holidays, so it actually adds another string to our bow if that's what we want. So these are just 4 examples of money that's coming into Cornwall to support Cornwall to the 2030 target. And is there another slide? Not sure if there is. Megan, is that the last one? Yeah, great. So I'll take questions. I've got my papers all in a bit of a muddle, and if I can't immediately answer it, there'll be 2 things I'll do. We'll send you the report itself, and that does it does 2 things. It sets out in note form, as you saw then, the announcements and what's being achieved and what's committed to, but then it provides information on where that's all come from. So you will be able to if you have the time, you'll be able to go and look at where that's come from. That may well answer your question. But if I don't know the answer, and if we don't get to you today, we will give you the information. So Julia, back to you. Thank you.
Julia.
Sorry. Derek, thank you. Great deal of meat in that report. Very helpful as we move on now to look at where the gaps are and what needs to be done. So on to questions, as you say. We've got some good questions here in chat, and we'll now invite participants to ask Derek their questions. Do stick to the subject, and you will be heard but not seen, because it's a webinar, not a Zoom meeting. Just remember it's recorded. So I'll start us off. So I'm Julia Havard, WI and Truro Diocese, and my question is, for net zero to be achieved, the support of the public and long-term changes in behaviour by them is required, and that involves all of us. Now, according to the Committee on Climate Change, the biggest consumer barrier to achieving net zero is lack of public awareness and lack of support, for example, for low carbon heating and electric cars. So what is needed is much broader public engagement by government, which we haven't seen a great deal of yet. So where is that, Derek?
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I'm hoping, so firstly, that was, I know I'm not government, but the point of this report, and it is a lot to read, is that is part of the work that we committed as a focus group to raise awareness of what's going on and where the gaps are. But in terms of, it's interesting because a lot of the reasons that people don't take up the things that you've described is about cost and about their whether they believe it's actually the right thing to do or not. So there are definitely, the cost of an electric vehicle is off-putting at the moment, and they are coming down. And as we produce more, and the government set to bring the date forward, will increase the number, and we always know that reduces the price. But I did argue when in 2018-19, I argued that the government should introduce some sort of scrappage scheme. I checked this with the Committee on Climate Change first to make sure we weren't just getting rid of cars that already had a big carbon footprint, and so basically getting rid of those and then just creating another carbon footprint with electric vehicle. They confirmed that over the lifetime of a vehicle, that wasn't the case. So I argued that we have a fairly generous subsidy scheme for low-income families. So say as much as £10,000 for an old diesel banger to help them towards a electric car. The government didn't pick up on that, although they haven't ruled out a scrappage scheme. I think there'll be just what's to take up. But what they have done is they've introduced some generous, in fact, very generous tax loopholes. So in terms of business, if you were to buy, as you know, if you have, Martha, I can't do this, sorry. Go and find your mum. Sorry, I've got a girl that's upset. If you have a company car, you'll pay a lot of tax for the privilege of that. If you buy an electric car, your boss buys an electric car, they are completely waived. There's no additional taxes in relation to having a company car. So that's an incentive for business to take up electric vehicles. But I was talking to someone today who just isn't confident the electric vehicle is the right way forward. There's and the cost of changing, it's about confidence. So I've been talking to heating engineers about heating systems and how to go forward to renewables, to air source, ground source, etc. And they're amazing how many say stick to oil and gas. So until the government, until the government actually stop them happening at all to be put into buildings, lots of people within construction are still wedded to what they've always done and have done for 40 odd years. So there's a massive, and if you're a heating engineer isn't encouraging you to go that route, you're just not likely to spend the money to do it, even though I think it's the right thing to do. And ground source in particular is quite an advanced technology now, and where possible, can work. I had a meeting yesterday, I'll be brief, but I had a meeting yesterday where we're still pursuing the idea of a fourth utility for Porthleven, where we would pump seawater, we would heat a brine with seawater that would then be available to every home, so they could have heat exchangers in every home that would take the heat out of that brine, as almost really as a fourth utility. It's something that I started engaging with when I first got elected, because it's off-grid Porthleven, and there was push to put it on gas grid, and there's no appetite in government for that even then. And so we were looking at alternatives, and we're continuing to pursue that with Exeter University, believe it or not. So there's alternatives, but it needs a shift. If you've got heating engineers that are advising you, really press them to think differently, because unfortunately a lot of them still will do gas and oil. And so we've got to really create confidence and, as you say, information. But the government tend to address behaviour with legislation and taxes, which you'll see, I've just explained with the company carpet.
Okay, thank you. Next, Elsa Johnson. We're going to the chat room now. All we have in the chat room, we have your names, but we don't have your organisation. So when it comes to your question, and I'll give your name, will you say which organisation you're in? Unmute yourself first, tell us who you are, what your organisation is, and then ask your question. So Elsa Johnson, would you like to unmute yourself, and off you go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm just wondering what your attitude is, Derek, to Land's End Airport, in view of the Committee on Climate Change saying that we should really be looking at aviation emissions big time. Whether you think there is a rumour that Land's End Airport is going to have a new runway and new hangars. And I was just wondering how this would fit into the spirit of reducing carbon emissions from aviation.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I don't know that rumour, and interestingly, I chair a local transport board for the Isle of Scilly, which includes the steamship company, the Skybus, and all the operators and landowners. So Cornwall Council, the Isle of Scilly Council, and that's not been discussed. But what has been discussed on Friday of last week is a shift towards low emission vessels and aircraft. We're in a position now, it is the same subject, but I'm going to move on to marine. We're in a position right now to draw up how we replace the vessels, and the commitment very much is to significantly drive down their carbon footprint and to find other ways of doing that. There is, you can think I'm completely crackers, and I'm happy for you to think that. You may already think that, but for about 3 years we've been looking at an Airlander 10. Now, this is not going to happen in the next 5 or 6 years, but this is an airship that's been developed that can carry a significant number of passengers, that could operate from Land's End, but there are significant questions about wind speed. I'm told it can fly in 40 knots. So there is discussions and conversations happening about how we move away from what we have today to something that delivers the net zero, which we're committed to. In every aspect. So we actually had in 2019, we had a trip agreed across a number of us, including Cornwall Council and the Isle of Scilly, where we were going to go to Bedford to actually look at whether this was a possible alternative for the link to Isle of Scilly. And the steamship and the heliport were engaged constructively in whether that could be delivered and how. Unfortunately, that got scrapped because of the general election, and obviously next year we were punting on something very different. But I don't know about the expansion that you're talking about. I don't know that at all. They have reduced the number of aircraft. You're probably aware of that. They have got a clear plan in the steamship, or a clear recognition that they need to drive down the carbon footprint, as we all do. And when the first expenditure will be in vessel replacement. That's critical, and it will not happen unless it can demonstrate that it dramatically reduces the carbon footprint. So you'll see a change in the shipping part of it more before you do in the aviation. Sorry, it's quite long-winded, but it's a conversation that is live right now.
Well, I've just come back on that. I mean,
Yeah,
in France, they're cutting down a lot of domestic flights, and you know, regional airports should not just do not tally with climate emissions. So we would be very upset if we found that Land's End Airport was being expanded and having new hangars and new runways. It would definitely be against the spirit of the reduction in emissions. And we're just wondering, as it's in your constituency, what your attitude would be. Would you be supportive, or would you be opposing it?
I don't know. Well, it's not been raised to me, and I have these meetings. I've had 3 local transport board meetings in the last 5 or 6 weeks, and it's just not raised. And we talk about plans and what the development all the time. So I just don't know about that, and I can ask. But right. So I don't agree. I don't disagree with you at all. But you're not. I don't think you're realistically suggesting that to go to the Arcilly will only ever have to be via.
No, I'm not suggesting that, but I think any expansion would be very controversial.
I hear that, and I don't. And to be honest with you, I don't know I don't know the answer, and I don't know the commercial bit of the building of the business, but I don't know that the demand is there. To be honest with you.
No, I'm thinking that with the Newquay becoming a space centre, they're probably going to be having, you know, and probably there would be a lot of oppositions to any expansion at Newquay Airport. So therefore, perhaps they're expanding Land's End Airport to subsidise, to bring resources for Newquay.
I will. So I can ask the question: what plans have you to extend and expand Newquay? Land's End. But I'd probably be confident to say that they are rumours and nothing more right now.
Yeah. I think that if it does go ahead, there will be a lot of local opposition in view of the fact that the special area that we have here at West Cornwall.
Yeah. Well, all the conversations I've had with the company, and it is the chief exec and other staff that sit on the board, is how we drive down the carbon footprint of the business. That is what we're discussing. So they're not. We're on the similar page.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay, next question is Melissa Benyon about the Green Homes Energy Grants. Melissa, over to you. Are you there, Melissa?
Hello there, I am here.
Oh, well done.
Yeah. I was looking into the Green Homes Energy Grant again. I'm a tenant in rented accommodation. As a tenant, I don't have any jurisdiction whatsoever to improve my situation unless I can convince my landlord to uptake on the grant, which puts me and thousands and thousands of people like me in an impossible situation. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is when I was looking at the Green Homes Energy Grant, I see that the applications have been stopped. So I wondered how that was compatible with the amount of homes that we need to retrofit and the pace in which we should be doing it.
Melissa, thanks for that. There is some policy coming down the road that means that landlords have to improve their homes to EPC rating C, and that's not far off. That's going to be challenging because it's quite a thing to get a building. Currently, your building must be E. If it's not, you should be kicking off. But all rented properties should be E, and that's moving to C. So there will be significant pressure on landlords to do the retrofitting you're describing, and there is money available. The Cornwall, as I said, is doing this pilot. It's a significant pilot of retrofitting, which is directly government funded. Unfortunately, I welcome the £2 billion when the Chancellor announced it during the late last year for the Green Homes Grant. My experience of it actually has been, I wouldn't welcome it again, because I've got so many cases in my office of really poorly work that has just caused nothing but difficulties for the homeowner and for the tenant, but actually not really improving the situation. So it's been so I'd say it's well intended but poorly executed, particularly in Cornwall. So I think we mentioned it last time, but I've always argued, really from very early days in Parliament when I discovered that the St Ives constituency has some of the highest levels of fuel poverty in the country, possibly in Europe. I argued that actually a far better approach would be to fund local authorities, both on the Isle of Scilly and here in Cornwall, to plan, commission and deliver the work themselves, using local tradesmen and developing local skills. The current Green Homes Grant doesn't do that. And the problem is the construction industry was already busy before it was introduced. So it's just allowed people that weren't necessarily busy to take up the work. And I know from being in building, and I want to be careful what I say, but if you want a really good job done, it's usually you want to get a busy builder, if I can leave it at that. But Melissa, I'm not a fan of today I'm not a fan of it. I welcomed it at the time. I think it was a significant indication of the Treasury's commitment to this, and the Treasury is always the hardest one to win. But it's been really poorly executed.
Can I just come back? I totally agree with you about the capacity and the potential for local authorities to take responsibility, create jobs, education opportunities, and bring money into the county. I think that's fundamental. But when it comes to the legislation associated with landlords, at the moment the commitment for landlords to be EPC E is based on how much money it would cost them to do that. So what we'll want to see with the C is that actually it has to be done regardless of the cost, and that it should be managed. It might just end up putting more houses back onto the housing market, but it's the legislation seems very restricted anyway in its power as it stands.
Yeah, I agree, and it's being looked at now by Bayes. Before Alok Sharma was promoted or moved sideways to COP26, he and I met and about this to try and thrash it out, because I think it has particular impact on our constituency. I ought to say that it's not as easy as you make it sound. You have to, a landlord, you're right, there is a figure, I think it's about £2,000 or £3,000, that if they spend that and can't deliver the EPC E, they can apply for exemption, but there's no guarantee of getting that. And that's certainly there are some properties that are extremely difficult to do if they're listed or etc., or if they just can't make the alterations, such as in cavity wall insulation. So you're right, it's possible to be exempt, to have a 5-year exemption, and that's all, you get a 5-year exemption. You still have to have shown that you've done everything possible to achieve E, and I don't know whether we could ask the council, but I don't know how many exemptions they've handed out. I've not yet heard, no landlord has said to me that they've been exempt, and I've spoken to 2 EPC operators, whatever you want to call them, inspectors, the people that do the checks, and they tell you that it's possible, but they're not aware of anyone who's gone down that route. You, mate, it sounds like you know about it, so are you aware of people that have been exempt?
No, I'm not, and
No.
I'm not, and a rating of E is obviously very unambitious, and a rating of C, I'm assuming, will come with another exemption, which means that there isn't actually a requirement for that work to be undertaken. So that's what I would be concerned about.
Well, all I can say, having tried to do it on a property, I got to E, but it was unbelievably challenging to do, but it was a listed building, so it wasn't, there was no way of putting on external cladding or internal cladding. But we've committed as a country to 2030 for every property east to be EPC C. That's ambitious. We just need to know how to do it. And you're right. The Green Homes Grant isn't the route to do it, though. I honestly don't think it is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on now to John Cummings and a question about global carbon budgets and our contribution. John, are you there? Can you unmute yourself?
Hello. The IPCC said that what matters is not just so much getting to net zero, but the cumulative global carbon budget. In other words, the total amount emitted en route to net zero. So how do the UK carbon budgets fit in with our share of the global carbon budget?
Okay, so I don't know the answer to that, but it's a really good point, and it's complex as anything. And I know that it's a subject of, I think it was a subject of a G8 recently, or G7, and will be the subject of the G7 in June. But John, let me do Megan, let's get the Commons Library to give us a good briefing on that very subject. Because John, I'm not even going to pretend I know the answer to that. But I do welcome, so just slightly related to that, I welcome the fact that the government are now including aviation and shipping in the 2035 figure. Megan, John, we'll take a note of your contact details and we'll get a briefing for you and send it across.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, you caught me on one that I don't know much about.
The next question is from Melissa. Let's just go on to Kelsey for the moment. Let's like to bring in one or two new people before we go to people who have asked questions before. So this is Kelsey Michael. If you're there, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi there. Hi. Yeah. Right at the beginning, Derek, when you showed the carbon budgets, I was just a bit confused because the 4th and 5th carbon budget haven't been met, apparently, which means that the UK isn't on track for the 6th. So we're way behind. So there is a big gap there. Scientists are telling us that the next 10 years are the crucial years when we make or break this situation. So we need a crisis plan, actually, an emergency plan. And I'd like to hear, you wanted to identify where the gaps were. Clearly, this is a huge gap showing itself. What, in your view, do we need to do? What emergency action can we take to avoid the disaster that we're heading for?
So the carbon budget 3, 4 and 5, obviously the dates, we haven't got anywhere near the dates where, well, obviously 3 we have, where the dates are to the way we should have met them by. So how are you saying we've missed them? Because the dates, I mean, so for example, 3 is 2022, 4 is 27, 5 is 32.
I mean, they're ongoing, aren't they? And they're being tracked as they go along. Yeah. So we're not going to wait till the end date to say, oh dear, we've moved it. We are going, and actually I got my information from the CCC website.
Yeah, but so okay, so it's fair to say, I'm happy to accept your challenge that we're not on track to get there, but the government have just, I mean, so yesterday the government say we'll get to 78%, and it's enshrined in law by 35, which brings that figure slightly forward. So in terms, so I think, so Kelsey, I think I sent you the report, didn't I?
You did.
You got the report, haven't you? Yeah. Have you read it? Oh, it's really.
It's a huge report, and I appreciate that it details everything that's been done to date. But I think it's where the gaps are that I would like to be talking about now, because that's what you said you wanted to identify. So, in your view, clearly there are large gaps. What are the glaring gaps, and what emergency action can be taken to fill them?
Well, the challenge. Sorry, I'm very happy to be challenged, but the point of the report is for people to look at it, absorb it, and I know I appreciate you haven't had it for very long, and then to come back and say, but I don't think the report does anything at all to address consumer carbon, for example. But I think you're right. If I go back to the point that Julie made right at the beginning, it's the way that government engages and takes with them the all of the general public, not just those that are signed up to this and probably a bit ahead of the government on it. There is still a massive chunk of the population that recognise that we need to look after the planet that we live in, to recognise that the impact on the world's poorest people in particular is truly horrifying if we don't get on top of this. But that's probably as far as their engagement engagement goes. And I don't want to be unfair on them. So I'll give you one example where we've been really rubbish. And this is where where TV adverts have been really appalling. And I'm just going to give you one example because of we got a long. I don't want to take up too much time, but while we're all talking about reducing the carbon emissions in transport, particularly private vehicles, the TV adverts are all about SUVs and all about actually what are, in relatively speaking, still diesel guzzling vehicles that are bigger than we actually need, and are doing nothing to help us get on top of this challenge. So the government will need, if you're asking me what could be done very quickly, the government need to whack significantly, and they have already, but significantly increase the cost of having these vehicles, or to have some way of managing the industry so that the marketing isn't forcing that isn't the Chelsea Tractor isn't the car that seemed to be the right one for us to have. I mean, having said that, we drive a fairly big vehicle, but it was the cheapest. In terms of we did the homework when we got it, and it carries our family around, and it produces the least possible emissions that a vehicle of that size does. And the reason we got it is because we had a child in a booster seat, a child in a car seat, and a 14, or in that time, a 13-year-old son, and they couldn't sit. It sounds a stupid thing, but unfortunately, if you're a parent of 3 children of that kind of age, it is a problem. We couldn't get them all on one row, so that's why we changed the vehicle. But I think it is. We've got to see a real step towards the ownership of the general public, because in that report, I'm very happy to have conversations in the near future, once people have absorbed the report, to say to me, this is an area where government just have not identified or picked up on whatsoever, because it's rough, that the breadth is quite significant about the measures that are being taken. But it does need, as you say, during the lockdown, we've gone on our, not maybe anyone here, but we've gone on our computers and purchased items we probably didn't need, and with those items come a fairly significant carbon footprint.
Can I just come in there and just say, I think what I'm really, I appreciate all the work that you've put into this report, and you did say that you were going to identify where the gaps were, where government needed to do more. And I think, I'm a member of the general public, I need to change my behaviour, but I really want leadership. I really want to be led. I want strong leadership from government. I don't really want to be the person writing to you saying, here's the gap here and here's the gap there. I really want to be told what needs to happen, because this is bigger than me. It's bigger than the consumer. We really need strong leadership and harsh action.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I would really like to hear from you what particularly you think needs to be done.
All right. Well, I do actually think that there's an opportunity for people in the constituency to have a look at the report and come back to me and say, but it doesn't do this, because I'm being encouraged to support the CEE bill, and I want to hear from constituents in the context of what is happening already, what difference the CEE bill will do. That's part of the challenge, and we can come on to that if you want in a minute. But if you said to me immediately, what would I do straight away? I would get the government just to do the progress more quickly, the new build, the net zero bit, carbon neutral bit. That's something we should have done. There is some real good reason why it didn't happen in 2015. I'm more educated now than I was then. But that we need to really accelerate our effort in that area. And we do need to be more brutal about the emissions that our vehicles produce. And so bringing forward the banning of electric and petrol and diesel cars is good. It forces industry to upscale. But we also need to really create a way of giving every household the opportunity to get away from the vehicle they drive now. And that includes understanding how we can charge significant numbers of vehicles at the same time or over a period of 24 hours. Those are 2 areas that we could make quite rapid progress on, and we'll need to if we're going to get to the 78%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's lovely. On to Holly Whitelaw, question about peat-based compost. Are you there, Holly? Can you unmute yourself?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello, Derek. Yeah, I find there's a few things actually, not just the peat-based compost, but it just seems absolutely ridiculous that you're trying to sort of preserve peat areas and put lots of money into that, but at the same time, it's totally legal to buy and sell peat-based compost. And I thought we'd already done this, and I can't believe it's still going on. And also with the new Green Deal going now via council, are you putting money towards the council so that they can upskill our builders in order for this to progress locally and we're not bringing in poor builders from elsewhere? That's vital. And just so you know, that Cornwall Climate Action Network have asked Cornwall Council for some funded positions, so money to help pay for people on the ground to liaise between different climate action groups and society at large, because it's basically the government don't want to do it, the council don't want to do it, no one wants to tell people what to do, and it's not just about that, it's about sort of linking learning, not repeating same old research, linking in funds, connecting with research institutions, universities, etc. So it would be great if the government could see this as a way of really improving society and helping, because there are people who want to do this, but they can't do it all the time for nothing. So yeah, peat, retraining of builders, and climate action, just so you know.
Yeah, so climate action, I think we discussed last time, and I've given it a lot of thought to that and trying to find how we enable that to happen. The peat, that's being banned by 2025.
Too late, guys.
Sorry?
It's too late.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I hear that. And it is a bit, and it's not such a, how can I say this without being naive? It's not such an important product that we can faff around. Anyway, at the moment, legislation is for 2025, but I will make a note of that, because I can find out the reason behind that from DEFRA. The skills bit, it's an interesting one, because I had a brief meeting this morning on that very issue about how we get colleges to really respond. I mean, there's a massive, so in the statement that the government made early in the year, the budget, there was an increased support for apprenticeships and a real pressure to increase the range of apprenticeships, in particular around renewables, construction, etc. But what we need is colleges to be delivering the really high quality courses. I mean, when I trained, it was a really high quality course. And there is opportunity still to do that. But I would say that there's a limited supply of apprenticeships within those areas that you were referring to. But also there's a limited appetite by some youngsters to go into them. So we have to change. It's interesting. I'm in the process of working out how I can work with schools to encourage them to see the value of these jobs. And I put in a question. I don't know if I'm successful yet, but I put in a question exactly as you're asking on the skills bit and the access to skills in the renewable areas and in construction for questions on Monday. But I don't know the ballot. I don't know the outcome of the ballot yet. And people that know the system know that MPs enter a ballot if they successfully get to take part. If they don't, they don't. And that's often what happens. But so Holly, let me do a bit of homework on I'll find out about why the peat bit is delayed, or rather waiting still another 4 years, and also find out. I'm already trying to make sure that we do make sure that skills are available. When the government announced, when they did the spending review in the autumn, that was the very question I asked, was how do we make sure that we really are giving really excellent skills to not just youngsters, but people that want to retrain in these areas, because we know before COVID, we had massive shortages in these areas. I think it was 100,000 shortage of people in construction, particularly around renewables and sustainable building. And that hasn't changed because we haven't trained that many in the last year. But the opportunity might be, through COVID having an impact on lots of people's jobs, there might be the time that people rethink about what they want to do with the rest of their lives. So there's opportunity to do it, but we need to seize the day. Thanks, Holly.
Yeah, and I think it's we don't have time to wait for the college guys to come through. We've got to train the builders on the ground and those who are long-term unemployed, etc. You know, and I'm already speaking to schools to make sort of sustainable jobs exciting. So it would be good to talk more about that. And I just think
you're right about the builders, but it's quite, as I described with heating engineers, it's quite a thing to turn. So when people are already busy, and this is no excuse, when people are already busy, it does take a time for them to adapt to a different way of doing things. And we've seen that in the renewable bit. And I've already explained the problems I've had with heating engineers. But you're right, I think you're probably suggesting that building regulations and legislation needs to force the issue, because when that happens, then obviously the architects and the people that build these properties don't really have a choice, and the building control people can enforce them, or can at least not give you a complete certificate.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've seen at Carbis Bay just sort of reiterates the farce that is our current planning system. And having sat in local council meetings where they spend hours and hours and hours discussing every planning proposal, giving their voluntary time, for it then to go up to county level, for them to go through it and spending vast amounts of money then looking at it, for it then actually not to have any relevance or legs or say, is just a total waste of energy. And as you suggest, we must tighten our laws so that
Holly, I agree with it. So we need to introduce laws, and this probably helps Melissa's point, to improve the built environment and the longevity of the efficiency of it. But the issue that you're referring to, there are people that just decide that they are going to go and do something, so it isn't the law that falls down, it's the ability to enforce the law that falls down. And Cornwall Council and the district councils previously have, I honestly believe this, and when I was on Penwith, we tried to resolve this. The appetite to use full enforcement powers and to properly resource enforcement wasn't there. So there are people, you and I will go ahead and go through the planning system and we'll build exactly what we're allowed to build. There are people that have decided, and we've got one over in the Mornaway right now, where they just decide that they are going to put something up and wait for someone to tell them to take it down. And that's the bit that falls down. And just to be clear to people, the G7 summit itself does not require the work that we've seen at Carbis Bay. And I've been clear about that for as long as it's been evident. And Number 10 have made it clear that they have not asked for permanent structures at Carbis Bay.
Last thing, sorry, and that's great.
Holly.
Last question was about the company or the organisation you were dealing with that you referred to about food waste in Cornwall.
Oh yeah, Hive.
This is my gleaning network and work around it.
It's Hive. It's
the Hive, yeah.
Yeah, I helped set them up with Tony Hogg and a chap called Brian Honey. It was a really interesting. So he was based. His wife was a chaplain at Coldrose. They had Navy chefs who were not on ship, and obviously you'll know now that everything's within the Navy on base. Stuff is privatized out, so or outsourced. So these chefs were at a loose end. So they worked with the chaplain's husband and a few of us to develop a way of taking. It's not a new idea, but just providing nutritious meals with leftovers from, or rather food that was surplus, not out of date necessarily, but was surplus, and that was from supermarkets, but also from earlier in the food chain. And he's now gone. Brian has now gone to run the Hive across the country, and then the Cornwall one continues. But they're providing a massive amount of meals each week, and they are deliberately good nutrition, and they are using surplus food that otherwise would go to landfill or elsewhere. So it's quite early days in it, and we were hoping for some money from Cornwall Council through the COVID money to develop actually some proper kitchens and proper established setups. We've not achieved that yet, and we're still trying to do that.
Thank you, Derek. I'll link
It's the
you
Hive.
in.
You can find them on the internet.
Yeah, no, I'm working for them actually.
Oh, great. So perfect. Look at that. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, sort of, but I'll link you in with conversations around sustainable food Cornwall, which the Hive
Yeah.
has partly
Yeah, yeah.
funded.
No,
Okay,
that's right. I'm aware of that because I met with someone from that organisation over at YHA about 3 weeks ago.
Great.
Great. Thanks, Holly. Nice to speak to you again.
Next question then, Andrew Stott. Can you unmute, Andrew?
It doesn't look like Andrew's here anymore.
What was the question though? Because it might be. Actually, can you stop sharing the screen now, Megan? It's a bit more interesting to look at human beings. I know they're not people in the webinar, but it is more interesting. What was the question, Julia?
Andrew's question then is, what is the national policy statement on, when is the national policy statement on energy going to be finally revised from its 2011 version so that it can play a part in driving zero carbon energy development and also stop schemes like the Cumbria coal proposal from progressing?
Yeah, Megan, you have to do the homework on that. But can I just say, Megan, if you can research that, because I don't know the answer, but can I just say on the Cumbrian coal one, that throws up a dilemma, because until we fully develop an alternative to fossil fuels, we still need, as I said earlier, to find a way of running. We still need to run heavy industry plants, build hospitals, railways, etc., and even generate some energy. So we can not have the Cumbrian mine, and I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but if we need coal to do this until we find the alternative, and the government have put a lot of money into trying to develop that technology to do the research and development, then we will just import it, and the rest of Europe will import it as well from China and elsewhere. So we need to decide how we get to net zero. There is some infrastructure that needs to be built, and there's some costs to the environment that need to be delivered, and it's not always essential, but there will be aspects of that. And so it's not a matter of, okay, we've committed to this, so we're just going to abandon these harmful things immediately, because it just isn't going to work. So I'm not saying that the coal mine is absolutely essential to what the nation needs, but I have read fairly lengthy papers saying that the alternative would be to import from China and elsewhere. And we'll just need to decide if that's the route we want to take. But we'll find out the answer to his initial question. We've got what have we got? A few minutes. So is there any more questions that we can quickly rattle through?
There's a good few left. Are we happy to go on a little bit after half past? I'm aware that people are dropping out now.
No, actually, I can probably 5 minutes. I've got a meeting at 5:30, so I probably do. I probably need to leave fairly soon.
Do you want to take a couple more then?
I just having a quick look through them.
Answer the rest by email, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm just. Yeah, so the point at least Elsa makes about advertising is an important one. The I've briefly, through the Conservative Environment Network, we've touched on the tradable energy quotas, but it's something that Megan, we could do some more work on that, can we? There is a plan. Well, so again, to Annie Phillips on the new homes to zero, the planning white paper that's going through at the moment commits to 70%, and that is because of the provision of electricity to the home. So the 70% is seen as the inbuilt carbon that can be avoided and the efficiency of the home. But we don't believe at the moment, the government do not believe that on paper they can get to 100%, because there is still electricity that homes will use that is not renewable. So it's just dishonest to get to net zero, to say that we will deliver 100% net carbon neutral homes, zero carbon homes. But there's ambition. Robert Jenrick his advisors and I and a few others met to discuss how we can get there. And we think we can be more ambitious than 70%, but it just wouldn't be sound legislation for us to legislate today for 100% carbon neutral homes. Previously, I felt that we let everyone down in 2015. I still feel that, but I understand why we can't do the 100% until we actually have nailed the inbuilt carbon across the board and the energy. I want to know public engagement. We just have to find a way to. I mean, unfortunately, it's good campaigns that people like you run. People like you sounds a bit harsh. That organisations run and WI, etc. And the work that WI have done in informing people who probably weren't naturally aware of this issue is quite significant. But government at the end of the day it will be legislation, and it will be taxes, and it will be things like scrapping green wood for sale, which is quite a significant policy policy thing that forces people to do something differently.
There's a couple of questions there that are asking for your thoughts about citizens' assemblies. Would you like to say a couple of words about that? Because I'm aware that we're pretty well out of time now.
Yeah, sorry. I think I've said this before. I think citizens' assemblies help elected representatives rather than hinder them. I think there are definitely people at Cornwall Council, elected representatives at Cornwall Council and in government, that are not fully prepared to make the difficult decisions because they don't believe that it's popular with the public. If you have a citizen assembly that can set out clearly what difficult decisions need to be made, and elected representatives can see the evidence and can follow through with those, it's not a get out of jail free, but it makes that decision much easier. I know as a human being that has red blood, you might not believe that, and that does care about what people feel. If I've shifted my position on things because of public opinion, and so I think that Citizens Assembly help to do that, help to make it easier for politicians to make what are really difficult decisions. So I think Citizen Assemblies are very valuable. We certainly haven't won that battle at Cornwall Council, and we haven't won that battle in Parliament yet. Is there any more there that I can't really? Do you want to leave it there? Well, we can capture those questions, can't we, Megan?
Yes.
What we'll
There's
do,
still a number of questions left, which we're probably going to need to deal with by email, or perhaps come back and talk about at the next meeting. But to say I'm aware that we're out of time now, and you've got another.
Yeah, we'll take the questions that we can genuinely answer, that deal with that we can actually provide information and evidence on. Ones that appeal to an opinion, we probably won't do, simply because of the time it takes. And Meg and I have got a shed load of things to do. Is that right? Thanks very much, Julie.
Okay. Well, thank you. Hugely interesting. Thank you very much, everyone, for their questions. Sorry we couldn't get round to every one of them, but to say we did our best. Thank you for taking part. Please come again. And a huge thank you to Megan, who's done all that organisation. So that's much appreciated. And unless there's anything else to say, we'll see you soon, or at least hear you.
Only just if people want the carbon report and haven't had it, can they please email in and we'll send them a copy straight away? And then come back to me with the bits that you feel which are missing. I know that Kelsey would rather I didn't do that, but I do want to hear where people feel the gaps are.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Julia and Derek and Megan.
Thank you, Julia.
Thanks a lot. Well done. Nice to see you again. Take care.